I could see at least two teams missing out with a winning record. Houston and Kansas City.
Really, it's going to be a battle of the two offenses in this case. So I predict a high-scoring game.
This is what they get for firing Brian Flores. You remember that 2021 season when the Dolphins won 7 in a row with Brian Flores just to get booted out of the playoffs and then terminated on Black Monday. Why would they even do that?
Offseason in terms of talent-wise, when they got Tyreek Hill, so they had the right talent the following year. If they had that exact same offseason with Brian Flores as the coach, how much different would have it gone? I don't know if we necessarily would have
been way different if Brian Flores.
It would have been better.
It would have been different with Brian Flores because he has a winning culture defense, but the offensive was pretty much god-awful.
Back in, like, say, Madden, the original Madden 25 franchise mode, it would have been generated during one of the off seasons. You get a random, like, Kurt Warner coming out of retirement or Ray Lewis coming out of retirement storyline. Good evening, folks. It is time for the last NFL Pick'ems for the 2025-26 regular season. I'm joined by my co-host, Agent Warrior X. And
Happy New Year's and happy holiday, sports fans. This is Agent Warrior X, and today is December 30th, 2025. One final day before New Year's Eve. Now, a lot of people were excited about what happened in Week 17. Week 17 was one of by far the most chaos and most controversial thing we have ever seen since in a very long time. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Giants have officially won against the Raiders. Not too happy, but I'm happy that we finally got a win after 2 whole months and over a year for the road victory. And 2, Jackson Dart has been balling out a lot. And as for the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Buffalo Bills game, well, let's just say it was a defensive game ultimately, but Josh Allen couldn't get the job done. The next thing I want to talk about is the Christmas games. Nikki, those Christmas games we mentioned were amazing. But Jalen Brunson, let's talk about this. Jalen Brunson did amazing in that Christmas game against the Cavaliers, especially that Deck the Halls game. But we're not going to be talking about basketball even further because this is football. The Christmas games were absolutely amazing, especially that game against the Broncos. I mean, they did at least put up a fight in the second half, right, Nikki?
Yep, I mean, Denver Broncos, I noticed, though, a trend following. It seems like they play down to their competition and make it competitive, but they play up in big games, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They'll go against teams like Raiders and Kansas City. They'll win in a lower scoring game, but then when they go against teams with good offenses, all of a sudden they start scoring a lot of points, a la Green Bay, a la Dallas. We've seen that follow the Broncos throughout the season. A la coming back in the fourth quarter when they were down big time against the Giants. So it's been a pattern with the Broncos, but the one big pattern is they always find a way to win these games, and they still have a shot at a home field advantage going into Week 18.
I mean, to be honest with you, when it comes to the Raiders, they know they're going to mess up their tank eventually after the ball drops. Now, for the Giants, this is no-brainer. You called it, Nikki, because I know for a fact tanking is illegal. And at one point, we're going to win a game. We can't just be an NFC East team who cares about top picks more than just winning cultures. Jackson Dart proved that. Jackson Dart proved that he belongs in the Giants. In fact, this whole year, before he was concussed a few times, he's been putting up numbers alongside Tyler Shough. Tyler Shough is also great too. But I think it's going to come down to the Wirecard Rookie of the Year and all these awards. But truly, the Offensive Rookie of the Year should not be Jackson Dart, unfortunately. It's going to be between T-Mac and Tyler Suge.
I mean, yeah, ultimately, usually that Rookie of the Year award, it goes to the player that made their team better and who played better winning-wise throughout the season. So that's why it's more likely going to go in those directions because of what's happened recently. But they could go with Jackson Dart because of his name, because sometimes name recognition plays a role in Rookie of the Year. See when Saquon got Rookie of the Year over Baker Mayfield. Now, don't get me wrong, Saquon had a good rookie year, but Baker had the Browns in the playoff mix until December, 1 year after going 0-16. So even though they only won 7 games, but that was an incredible turnaround from a winless team the previous year. But they still went with Saquon, I think, in part because he was the more marketable. They felt he was maybe a little more marketable at the time, but that's how it usually works with you. Even see, like, switching sports when LeBron got Rookie of the Year. Some people thought Carmelo should have gotten it for carrying the Nuggets to the playoffs, but I guess they wanted to go with their future golden boy. So
and that's exactly what their plan is. I would be surprised if Joe Shane decides to draft a quarterback after Dart's performance. I mean, again, that is Dable's quarterback, and so is Shane. So my thing is this: they should keep Jackson Dart for development purposes, get him some help in terms of the receiving core, and get him some protection. Simple as that. The simple 1, 2, 3 steps. You'll be, and with everybody coming back healthy, you have a shot to win not only the NFC East, but also a future playoff contender. Similar to what we saw with the Denver Broncos. Similar to what we saw with the New England Patriots when they got Stephon Diggs. And similar to the Bears when they got Ben Johnson. If they hire the right coach, the right pieces, then they got a shot. Until then, you got to work on it. Work on hiring a head coach who has great experience and hire an offensive coordinator who knows how to get offensive done, and defensive coordinators will be amazing.
But that remains to be seen with the Giants. But what was interesting, I thought about this, I feel like the Eagles and Texans performances were kind of parallel to each other in their respective wins, where both offenses did well getting scoring drives in the first half. They didn't do so great in the second half offensively, but their defenses stepped up and helped them win close games against good teams.
If I had to choose the best defensive team this whole season, has to be the Texans. I'm not going to be biased about this, but the Texans have an elite defense.
I feel like, hey, I've been saying it. Come playoff time, when the Texans step up, the factor to whether they're contenders or whether they fall short is going to be what does C.J. Stroud do against teams such as the Patriots or the Broncos or even the Jaguars if they clash again in the come playoff time.
Or the Chargers or the Steelers or Ravens come Sunday night. But, however, there is one problem. There is one problem that's got out of the way. No Chiefs. The boogeyman has officially been casted away because Buffalo is now desperate enough to win a Super Bowl.
And for some of the Patrick Mahomes doubters that said it had more to do with Andy Reid and that Andy Reid could slot any quarterback in, they pointed toward his time with the Eagles when Jeff Garcia filled in for McNabb or A.J. Feely filled in McNabb. But here in this, or Nick Foles briefly for Alex Smith before Mahomes started. But as we've seen the past 5 games without Mahomes, they average 7 points in those 5 games without Mahomes. So it goes to show you can't just throw anybody in there and expect it to work. That team's specifically set up for Mahomes to run it.
And to top it all off, I think the Raiders will probably do the most Raider thing possible and just destroy their tank at the last moment, which we will get into on the Sunday afternoon games. But as of right now, there is no Thursday night games. There's only Saturday and Sunday.
Yep.
The final week of the NFL season in 2025. Who will get the number 1 pick? Who would get the final spot in the playoffs? Who would win the NFC? Who would win the NFC South and AFC North? Let's find out right now.
Yep. And you're going to notice a trend. It's continuing from previous years of A, they flex times, and B, they also are all going to be division rivalry games this week. So that's going to be the deal with this week. And now we got the right screen up. Now it's time to share. And we start off on Saturday with two games that are going to have division implications in the NFC. First, we start off in Tampa Bay, NFC South on the line, Bucks versus Panthers.
First Saturday on ESPN, we got the Carolina Panthers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa is now on the brink of a late season collapse. Carolina is this close. They're almost at the finish line to clinch not only the playoff spot for the first time in 10 years, but also host a playoff game for the first time in over 10 years with Cam Newton. Bryce Young still continue to do Bryce Young things. But the problem with Bryce Young is that the Carolina defense gave up too many yards against the Seattle Seahawks offense. Tampa, with the battle of Florida between the Dolphins and the Buccaneers, I could see this as a winner. The winner of this year's NFC South is the Carolina Panthers.
You know what? I have to agree on that, despite what most people are saying, because we've seen, although just on one side note, it's interesting. I feel like Bryce Young and Baker Mayfield, the one thing I noticed was that sometimes some of those quarterbacks, when there's no expectations, they excel, but when the pressure's on, they don't do so great. But in this one, I got to go with the Panthers because the Bucs are in a full-blown free fall. They look like the more dysfunctional. Now, the Panthers may not have the greatest roster, but they have an underrated secondary led by J.C. Horn, the son of New Orleans Saints great Joe Horn. And they do have an offense that in the right situation can click. Now, going against a Tampa Bay team that's free-falling, fresh off a loss to the Dolphins, I like the Panthers' odds of getting that first division title since 2015 and first playoff game since 2017 wild card versus the Saints. Give me the Panthers, beat the Bucs. I think that's Bucs got to go back to the drawing board, and Carolina gets a home playoff game against number 5 seed. And speaking of seeds, home field advantage is on the line.
This is going to determine who wins the NFC South. NFC West. This is going to determine who wins the bragging rights, the number 1 seed in the National Football Conference. The Seattle Seahawks versus the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers pulled the game of the year against the Chicago Bears and potentially an NFC divisional or NFC championship matchup. Now, Seattle are coming off a really great win against the Panthers, which, by the way, it was a very winnable game in the first half because Sam Darnold kept fumbling the ball constantly. My biggest problem with Seattle is that Sam Darnold in the playoffs sucks. Aside from JSN, aside from Cooper Kupp, aside from Kenneth Walker, aside from Leonard Williams, aside from Julian Love, the Seahawks on paper looks like a legit contender. Even with Geno Smith last year, they finished it with a winning record, but ultimately missing the playoffs. And this is going to determine who wins the West. The San Francisco 49ers will win. And here's why. Christian McCaffrey can outrun the running game against Seattle. George Kittle is still the best tight end. And the final thing I want to say for the 49ers is that they look like a legit contender. Now, they host Super Bowl 60 here at that stadium. Last decade, it was the same stadium, but ultimately the Broncos winning it. Now, we could see a pattern. Could this mean that San Francisco clinches a home playoff game and the first round bye? We may never know. But the number 1 seed, San Francisco.
Yep, I got to agree with you on that one. Wow. It reminds me, it's like having flashbacks to last season when Sam Darnold was in the NFC North, you had the Vikings and Lions, two really good teams, the most exciting game going into the week. But ultimately, under pressure, Sam Darnold fell apart, and that played a role in the Vikings' decision to move on from him. But that's another story for another time. I feel like Sam Darnold, that guy that when there's no expectations, he can deliver. But when the pressure's on, he doesn't do so well. Now, Brock Purdy, even in Super Bowl 58 in defeat to Kansas City, he was put up a solid outing, even helped get them in field goal range. Unfortunately, their defense couldn't hold the Kansas City off. So Brock Purdy's had several deep playoff runs, 2 conference championships, Super Bowl start. We know he can play under pressure. Just the only thing missing is a Super Bowl ring. And San Fran's been looking like their old self from a few years back again. I like their odds in this one. We saw their offense he destroyed the Chicago Bears defense. And I like their chances against the Seattle Seahawks team, especially in high-pressure game at home. Give me the Niners to get home field, clinch home field advantage, and build momentum.
This is no shocker. No tank boat needed. Falcons versus Saints. I forgot to tell you this. Monday night was a great game for Atlanta. Despite the fact that they hold the Rams defense for quite a while now. But I think, in my perspective, when Kirk Cousins played his heart out alongside Bijan Robinson or Brian Robinson, this is the greatest thing we've ever seen. The Saints, with Tyler Shugg, looks like a great player. Great rookie so far. The defense has been carrying the team alongside Kool McKinstry and Cam Smith. But other than that, I'm seeing this as a one lopsided. Falcons over Saints.
I think it's interesting we talked about last night. Troy Aikman even said during the game that the Falcons were probably looking at a what if, particularly with the 2 losses to the Panthers. And I got to agree. I think the Falcons are at that point. They'll take out their frustrations on the Saints, get the win. Could this be a competitive game? Possibly. The Saints-Titans was actually more exciting than we thought it would be. So I could see this game being a competitive game, even though it doesn't look like the flashiest. But give me the Falcons because even with, let's say, the talent's better, it's just the coaching that was disorganized and cost them a lot of close games like it has the past couple seasons. But against the Saints, I'll take the Falcons to win this one. Don't be surprised if this is better than expected.
Yep. Next up, AFC North showdown between the Browns and the Bengals. The Bengals were coming off a really great win against the Cardinals. The Browns, surprisingly, they were pulling an upset against the Steelers. But considering how this would play out in terms of games like these, I think, in my perspective, Cleveland should definitely play defensively. Cincinnati, however, could outpace them. Bengals over Browns. Excuse me.
Yeah, I like the Bengals over the Browns. Now, I do think, though, this could be a competitive, more of a high-scoring game, and Shedeur Sanders might show flashes of good, and this might be a game where both teams get over 20, both quarterbacks throw for at least a touchdown each. I do think Myles Garrett gets his 1 sack, breaks the record, but Cincinnati ultimately wins out. Where Joe Burrow just does what he's been doing last couple weeks, taking out his frustrations on other teams, and it's going to create that big what if for the Bengals, though, too. And I think we know what if that is. But I'll take the Bengals over the Browns.
Exactly. That what if would that be Joe Burrow not injuring his toe on the turf and continuing having an AFC North contention and potentially the playoffs. Next up, we have the Green Bay Packers versus the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings were coming off a really, really good, impressive victory against the Lions, ultimately knocking them out of the playoffs. The Packers, well, let's just say on Saturday, they got ran over by Derrick Henry too many times. But in terms of Max Brosmer, I think Max Brosmer could ball out and play spoiler. But the real question is, does this mean that the Packers would beat the Vikings? No, because despite the fact that Micah Parsons is out for the year, you have Jordan Love potential still out for the year, and Malik Willis is low key carrying the team. So Vikings over Packers.
Mm. This is an interesting one. I got to say this about the Vikings. The JJ McCarthy experiment. This is the third time he's been pulled from the lineup due to injuries. Granted, I feel like it's because they brought him back too fast, but the fact this has happened and he missed his whole rookie season, I'm a little bit concerned about your long-term future at quarterback there due to the availability. But as far as this matchup goes, I mean, the Vikings, we know they don't believe in tanking. Even though this wasn't their best season, and the Packers, they're kind of in a free fall. They're just kind of lucky they're still in playoff contention. They're lucky the Lions fell apart. So, I don't know, but I guess if the Vikings are, depends on who they start. If they start Max Brosmer, I'll go with the Packers to win this. But even if Malik Willis plays, but that goes to show you right there that it need more than just a quarterback for a team to click. See Malik Willis at Tennessee versus Green Bay, it's like two different quarterbacks.
Yep.
All right.
Next matchup, we got the.
I think your audio is breaking up.
Hold on. You can hear me good, right?
That's better.
All right. Next up, we have the Dallas Cowboys versus the New York Giants. This is the first time in 5 years that we haven't played the Cowboys since that tank division we had a long time ago. Well, sorry, 5 years during the pandemic. You already know how that played. We beat the Cowboys. You lost to that godforsaken Washington football team, ultimately knocking us out of the playoffs. So in terms of Jackson Dart, I want him to finish on a win, which I completely understand. But going up against the Dallas team that has been very good in terms of the offense and defense before the defense was absolutely terrible. Don't get me wrong, I mentioned this couple of times with the Dallas Cowboys offense. Their offense is perfectly balanced. But with George Pickens, still there, and you still have CeeDee Lamb there, you have Jake Ferguson still there. I still believe Dallas can pretty much take their frustration out of the Giants still. Despite the fact that they're not in the playoffs, I could still see this as a loss for the Giants. Ultimately, though, it's going to come down to the wire because if they lose, they will potentially have the number one pick if the Raiders beat the Chiefs, which we will get to that later. But as of right now, I do see Jackson Dart finishing his season as a rookie another touchdown or two. Cowboys over Giants.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go with the same route because yeah, the Giants won last week, but you don't get the privilege of playing the Las Vegas Raiders every week. And the Cowboys, we saw how they matched up against Washington. Offensively, Dak balled out enough for them to win. Going against the Giants, I predict the same thing's going to happen. But it's probably going to be similar to the Washington game with Jackson Dart being the highlight for the Giants offense, Dak being the highlight for the Cowboys, and the Cowboys getting a win in a high-scoring game.
You know what's crazy? What happened 5 years ago before 2021 hit is that the fact that we played against winner take all in week 18 before the Buccaneers is that Daniel Jones has played his heart out. Everybody else did their part except before Saquon Barkley moved to Philly. And we beat them. We beat the Cowboys on a fumble recovery. Ultimately, you guys had to spoil our Sunday night and missing the playoffs potentially to the godforsaken Washington football team. I still won't give the Eagles for doing that 5 years ago. And I really hope for the NFC East sake is that this team should be healthy and competitive. That's it.
And this should be simple enough.
You know, I already know who's going to win the AFC South besides the Texans, but the Tennessee Titans versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Cam Ward, well, Cam Ward should at least end the season off strong. But going up against the Jaguars offense, by the way, do you remember what happened 3 years ago with that same situation in Week 18 on Saturday night?
Oh, yep, the Titans, the end of the Mike Vrabel era of the Titans, or the beginning of the end, I should say.
Exactly, because all they had to do was to beat the Jaguars and you made the playoffs. But guess what? They had a late season collapse for the first time in quite a while. So this won't be a shocker because there's no Doug Peterson. Jaguars over Titans because Trevor Lawrence can outplay Cam Ward.
And the difference is this time the Jaguars are actually looking like a legit threat in the AFC for the first time since the Tom Coughlin era. Even when they made the conference championship in 2017, they were kind of the surprise team. They made the playoffs, but even then it was like, maybe they'll make it to the second round at best. But here, Jaguars look like a legit threat. They could actually make some noise, and the Titans are they're just waiting for this season to be over and to go back to the drawing board for next year. So I'll take the Jaguars to win because they actually have something to play for. A long shot, but they could get home field if the Patriots and Broncos lose. So the Jaguars are going to go out and play with the hopes that it plans out that way. So give me the Jaguars to beat the Titans.
Exactly. And this time around, I think the Titans needs more than just a quarterback. They need like a receiver, they need a running back, they need pretty much half the pieces they need. If they hire the right coach, if they hire the right coordinators, same situation with the Giants. But I see this playing out as one lopsided.
All right, and then we got the Texans versus the Colts. Now, if the Jaguars somehow were to lose and the Texans win, they could clinch the AFC South. So we know they're going to be playing for something against the Colts.
I don't think it's enough. In terms of the situation with the Texans and the Colts, well, technically we heard that Philip Rivers retired again. I don't see this playing out for the Texans because they need the Titans to lose. But the Texans will win anyway.
Yep. Give me the Texans in this one. The Colts. All right, it's just I think it was more than just Daniel Jones' injury. Something got to their heads when they were 7-1 where they thought they were invincible and it affected their play on the field even before Daniel Jones' injury. And now we see the effects of it coming full circle with that having to rely on Philip Rivers in the failed experiment. So the Colts, just the quicker it's over, the better. For Houston, they can build momentum for the playoffs, maybe still have a shot at the AFC South, so they'll at least give it a go.
I'm going to put it this way and say that the last time a team that started 7-1 and missed the playoffs was the 95 Raiders. You remember that? Remember that 95 Raiders team before the Cowboys won the Super Bowl? The Raiders started off strong, ultimately having a late season collapse.
Yep, and in this one,
I think this should be pretty simple. Buffalo, they pretty much have nothing to play for. They pretty much have nothing to play for. And the division was already over the moment that you beat the Bills. And I was wrong about that. I was wrong about Josh Allen doing Josh Allen things, but ultimately this should be no excuse. Come playoff time, even without the Chiefs, you should still make a run. And that's pretty simple. But going up against a Jets team who's god awful in every aspect, I highly doubt that this Jets team will do anything. But if the Bills decided to bench Josh Allen to have their backup quarterback, I wouldn't mind it. I wouldn't mind Mitch Trubisky playing against the Jets, but I think the Jets will still destroy the tank and miss out.
I mean, Buffalo might jump. I think it's a great point, though, because you never know if Buffalo might rest their starters. Now, if they still decide to play their starters even for the first half, give me Buffalo to beat the Jets. But honestly, the Jets are so horrible that the Bills' backups may still beat them anyway. So give me the Bills beat the Jets.
Even if they rest their starter, look, that's the situation they did when they won the AFC East last year.
Yep, so give me the Bills to take care of business with the Jets. Now, one team's in the playoffs, the other's out, but there is seeding on the line for the Chicago Bears.
Not going to waste too much time, though. I see the Lions finishing last place in the NFC North. After all that hype they went through for the NFC Championship 2 years ago and clinching the NFC North back-to-back years, I think Detroit deserves better. But considering how Jahmyr Gibbs played out against the Vikings was inexplicably bad. Dan Campbell needs to get his cards right instead of just going a fourth down constantly. That's like saying you're gambling this amount of money so that way you can hope to win big, but 95% of the time you don't. The moral is don't go on fourth down too many times if you're not at the first down marker. But considering how the Bears defense played against the 49ers in a potential game of the year, I could see the Bears winning out. Bears over Lions.
Yep, in this case, it's a lost cause for the Detroit Lions. And it goes to show you how important Ben Johnson really was to them. And now, but the Bears, remember, they still do. I mean, they still have the number 2 seed on the line because if they win, they automatically get that number 2 seed. Do they want what looks like it would be 2-7 versus the Packers? Probably. Because they know if they lose and the Eagles win, Eagles have less losses. So the Bears are going to play and give it their all. And I predict them to beat the Detroit Lions and bounce back and get the number 2 seed for the NFC this year. This game actually is interesting. Broncos versus Chargers.
We already know that the Broncos clinched the AFC West, so they pretty much have nothing to play for. The Chargers, they pretty much have nothing to play for either. But considering how the offense plays out for Bo Nix and the others, I see the Broncos winning. Ultimately, if Sean Payton plays his cards right come playoff time and the defense steps up with PS2 and Nick Bonito, I think this team could have a shot to go back to the Super Bowl for the first time in over a decade. Broncos over Chargers.
And not to mention, the Broncos do have home field advantage potentially on the line because if they win, they get home field advantage. So they're going to want that to get that first round bye and hope that'll make the road to the NBA Finals easier. So I'll take the Broncos to beat the Chargers in this one and even the series up 1 apiece during the regular season. Because we know the Broncos usually play up offensively when they're in a tough game. So I think they'll do that here because they want home field advantage.
Yep. Well, this is no Tank Bowl. This is pretty much an injury bowl at this point because, 1, the main quarterback is out. 2, the Raiders look god-awful in every aspect except for the offense. And 3, they're maliciously ruining a power-hungry Asher Genty. Kansas City Chiefs versus Las Vegas Raiders. This is to determine who gets the number 1 pick. Kansas City, they'll probably get busted up anyway. If Max Crosby gets a go, that means the Raiders have something to play for. And I kid you not, they will not be for the number 1 pick. And that he mentioned earlier, he doesn't care about the number 1 pick because he wants to win. I understand he wants to win. And the Raiders wants to win too. But considering how Las Vegas played last week against the Giants was inexplicably bad, especially Geno Smith. I feel sorry for Geno Smith. And considering how Kenny Pickett did terrible, I think the 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 Chiefs might do something the most hilarious way and just lose to the Raiders. I think the Raiders can pretty much outplay them in terms of the running game because this whole year, the Chiefs' running game has been slightly weak. Give me the Raiders over the Chiefs. That way, the Giants can clinch the #1 overall pick.
You said the Raiders have been dreadful. I don't know if I trust the Raiders against anybody at this point. But then again, Kansas City has been so awful without Mahomes. I wouldn't be surprised if this were a tie.
I swear, if this ends up in a tie, they'll still get the #1 pick regardless.
It would be hilarious if that does end up happening. But, oh boy. I'm basically like, I'm going to just try to toss up a coin because this really could go either way with how bad the Raiders are and with Kansas City having nothing. So, I'll take I'll take Kansas City. That's how bad it is.
Because remember, tanking is illegal. At one point, you have to win.
Or at least try.
Don't worry, I think Asagenti will go off against the Chiefs anyway. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Rams versus the Arizona Cardinals. Not going to waste too much time. Rams were this close for coming back. All they needed to do was win a few games, and you have the #1 seed, and you blew it. Take your frustration out of Arizona. That's pretty much it. Rams over Cardinals.
Yep, pretty much. Self-explanatory. The Rams to beat the Cardinals. Then we got Patriots, Dolphins. Home field advantage potentially on the line for the Patriots.
You know, considering how Miami played out without Tua, I think Quinn Ewers has a shot to do the impossible, to do the unthinkable. But it's not going to be good enough because the Patriots defense is still elite. Dolphins versus Patriots, Drake May, he's still showcasing why he's the best MVP. Patriots over Dolphins. Enough said.
Yep, this would probably be a more competitive game, but I still got the Patriots over the Dolphins in this one. Philadelphia Eagles, who not the greatest year, but they're still NFC East champions, going against the Washington Commanders with nothing to play for. I mean, at least the Eagles aren't getting smoked by threes by the Grizzlies right now.
Oh, you talk about the Sixers?
Yeah, I'm multitasking between
it.
watching that and hosting pick'ems right now.
I know. I was gonna say about your team. Your team looks dreadful in terms of the offense. I told you, you vouch for a rat. Come playoff time, I don't see the Eagles making a playoff run if this offense continues to be inconsistent.
You're breaking up.
If this offense, you can hear me good, right?
A little bit.
All right. I think in my perspective, you vouch for a rat. Kevin Patullo is a former Jets QB coach for the New York Jets. And I don't think Kevin Patullo should ever be near as an offensive coordinator ever again. And the reason why I say you vouch for a rat is because the fact that you hired a Jets QB coach who was god awful in situations with Aaron Rodgers. He did the same thing with Zach Wilson, and that's pretty much it. But I don't forget my good friends in terms of the NFC East. Because the fact that you won the division, which I expect you to do, I don't see you making a deep playoff run. You still got a great defense, but it's not going to be enough in terms of the offense. If you show up like this in the playoffs, that's a different story. Eagles over Commanders.
Yeah, in this one, absolutely. And Kevin Patullo, why a Jets quarterback coach? When was the last time you ever put Jets quarterback coach in the sentence and actually took that as a serious claim?
That's literally the mistake you made with Matt Patricia.
Oh, yeah. But at least in this one, going against Washington, if the Eagles, if they play their starters, I got them winning this game. It's pretty explanatory. The Commanders have nothing going for them this season. They're just waiting for the season to be over so they can start to reboot and figure out what they can do next year. So give me the Eagles to win this game. Then we just got to see what they do come playoff time. And then we close it out with the best rivalry in the AFC.
This is determined who's going to win the AFC North. We got the Baltimore Ravens versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers were coming off a very tough loss against the Browns, which, by the way, was a must-win game. But the 9-8 Steelers is still inevitable. Who would win the AFC North? Who would have bragging rights to split the series? My answer? Baltimore. Because Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews could definitely outpace the Steelers defense, despite the fact that they're using TJ Watt a little bit more, but I feel they're wasting their careers. Ravens over Steelers to win the AFC North.
And I'll put it this way. Ravens, Steelers, you can never trust a sweep in that series. You haven't gotten one, I think, since 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
And look how that turned out that 5 years ago. They ended up having a late season collapse and winning the division to the freaking Browns.
And then, well, the Ravens upset the Titans on the road. But as far as this one goes, yeah, I'll take the Ravens to win this one and win the AFC North. And John Harbaugh will be lucky to keeping his job. But then the question is, what do the Steelers do with Mike Tomlin? Do they finally feel like it's ran its course, or do they just try to turn over to Will Howard and see if it gets better from there? I got the Ravens in this one. Derrick Henry has a monster game, and they end up winning the AFC North.
Yep. And now, don't forget the one day that we all knew in terms of these. Bring out your Death Notes one more time. Put your sheet of paper to collect the terminated GMs and coaches on this somber day. We call it Black Monday. The first Black Monday coach will be terminated. Todd Bowles from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The fact that Todd Bowles actually did well in terms of the NFC South Buccaneers, but in terms of that, he did the same situation with the Jets before he was terminated. We know why. Todd Bowles, at best, is a mediocre coach. He did the same situation with the Jets back in 2015, ultimately maliciously ruining a power-hungry Baker Mayfield and potentially Mike Evans. If they lose out for the rest of the season and they miss the playoffs, I think that Todd Bowles at best has to be a coordinator.
Absolutely. And I'd say the next coach that's going to get the boot on Black Monday after that would be Mike McDaniel.
We already know what happened to Mike McDaniel. 2 playoff appearances and no playoff victories. My question for Mike McDaniel is, after Brian Flores was terminated, what the heck were the Dolphins doing? I think the Dolphins should have terminated Chris Kreider before Brian Flores was booted out. It should be Chris Kreider going, not Flores. After casting both of them during the midseason and the coach in 2021, Miami has officially admitted that they have chose the wrong side on the greater purge. Ultimately, for them, they have officially wasted Tua's career and potentially Tyreek Hill's career. The third coach, I'm going to mention Joe Schoen, GM for the New York Giants. Giants. What a mediocre GM he is. Whatever you think of mediocre general managers, he's going to go down there with a few GMs such as Scott Fitterer, Rich Kotite, and Gene Smith. All you have to do is go over some of the moves he did. Letting Xavier McKinney go to the Packers and not extending him long-term sight unseen. Hiring Brian Daboll, letting Saquon Barkley go, only for him to magically do better on the real system and win the Super Bowl with them the following year. Not signing Wan'Dale Robinson a long-term in terms of spot of a contract and having a 1,000-yard season long-term. Choosing Darius Slayton over another receiver in the draft. And that contract with Daniel Jones. You know which one I'm talking about.
Yep.
Even if you think that this is supposed to be the best lineup, which I think, in my opinion, is on paper looks very solid. In terms of the track records, his drafting is hit and misses. His hit at best was Malik Nabers, Abdul Carter, and Jackson Dart. But by the way, Daboll wanted him because of the scouting report with Mike Kafka. But the only coach I'm going to see staying is Carmen Bracillo from the Giants O-line coach. He has made the Giants O-line a lot better with Andrew Thomas's help. My biggest concern about my concern about Andrew Thomas is that he is injury prone. And in terms of the track records, in terms of the tying the Commanders and losing out on most must-win games, this was abhorrent regardless. This was football incompetence personified. This is how you set a franchise back for half a decade. And with the Giants potentially getting the number 1 pick or the number 2 pick, they could have a chance to trade down. And the Giants aren't just in football hell. They're just in hell. And the picks that they have in terms of trading the picks to the Texans and other teams is what's keeping their team from burning alive.
So for the next one, I'm actually predicting an organization to get rid of their GM and their coach. I'd say out west, the Arizona Cardinals let GM Monty Ossenfort go and head coach Jonathan Gannon go. Because their transactions under them have been atrocious. We've seen Jonathan Gannon took over in 2023 with a okay roster. When Kyler Murray came back, they won a few games, but he only played the later portion of the season, so Gannon got some benefit of the doubt. But we saw last year with an easy schedule, they bundled an opportunity to win the NFC West when the Niners were down and out. And this year, they were just absolutely dreadful. And don't even give me the Kyler Murray injury. There were far bigger problems than that this year. And it speaks to both GM and coach. So I see the Cardinals axing both of them and starting fresh this offseason.
You know, Nikki, I'm starting to think that Arizona is an incompetent run clown show. After casting off Cliff Kingsbury and the former GM, Arizona has officially admitted that they chose the wrong side on a greater purge. I think at this point when Jonathan Gannon was released after Super Bowl 57, I think this wasn't the best idea. And Shane Steichen, don't get me wrong, Shane Steichen is an excellent coordinator at best. But having him as coaching for the Colts is not the best.
Yeah, especially after the collapse. I could easily see them just pulling the plug. But here's a mediocre team that I think could get rid of their coach, Raheem Morris, because of the way they lost a lot of close games that they probably should have won. Kind of similar to when the Vikings lost a lot of close games with Mike Zimmer. They really just needed a change of voice in the locker room. That was Kevin O'Connell. The Falcons are probably in that position. They just need that new coach, a new voice in the locker room.
The next coach I'm going to mention is Aaron Glenn. Oh my God. Oh my God. One of the worst Jets hires we've ever seen from before time and time was going to be terrible as a defensive coordinator to a head coach who eventually was going to get fired for it, who eventually hired another defensive coordinator and get fired for it. Everybody knew that Aaron Glenn was a hack except for that dance he did. If I could choose a better coach, you have to have a coach in terms of experience, winning cultures, and multiple playoff contentions. Jets have learned nothing from it ever since they hired Adam Gase, which, by the way, went from the hottest coaching prospect to the most uninspired coach in the league. The Johnsons saw this and said, "You know what? We're gonna hire this guy and try to be better. We're gonna do something.
Hold up a second, it's breaking up.
We're gonna do something better." You can hear me good, right?
Yep.
We could do something better than what we saw a minute ago with that Giants coach. Boom, where's our payment? We're the best team in New York. It was a mess from the beginning, completely misusing Breece Hall in his final year. Completely misusing Breece Hall for the final year and maliciously ruining a power-hungry Justin Fields. So much for that so-called best team in New York. I'm going to put it this way. If I'm at a bar or Dave and Buster's watching a football game every Sunday, would I go say the Jets are the best team? Absolutely not. But in terms of perspectives, you got to stop hiring defensive coordinators who are great in defense but has no experience in terms of the in terms of head coach. Hire someone like Dable. Hire someone like, I don't know, maybe try to scout a good coach either from the previous seasons on the final contracts or something else. Either way, you still got a lot of work to do in terms of quarterbacks and pretty much everything on the offense, and stop wasting Garrett Wilson's career. Yes, I am bitter about this, Nikki.
Wow. I mean, the difference between Aaron Glenn and Dan Campbell is, at least, even though the Lions didn't win a lot of games, you saw them play better as the season went along. Whereas the Jets with Aaron Glenn, they've just gotten progressively worse and less competitive as the season goes along. There's been no signs of going forward or moving forward in the right direction. Similar to the Cardinals, who started off 2-0, and by now you forget that they were ever 2-0. It's like that never even happened with how awful they were as the season's gone along.
Which, by the way, the next coach I'm going to mention is a shocker. Yes, Mike Tomlin. They will actually do it. If they lose on Sunday night's game, they may as well just do it. Pull the trigger and fire that man. Because a lot of Steelers want him gone because they are tired of the 9-8 Super Bowl team. In my opinion, if they actually do that, I think a good candidate should be either one of two teams if they decide to pick them, the Giants or the Titans. But in my perspective, Mike Tomlin, throughout his career, has given multiple winning seasons after winning seasons after winning seasons after winning seasons. And since those winning seasons, they have not been executing in the playoffs other than that 2010 Super Bowl run with Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger, who ultimately, by the way, in that 2009 Super Bowl with the Cardinals, was ultimately great. Since then, they have not been better. They have been constantly getting multiple disappointments. And to top all off, those 9-8 teams ultimately missing the playoffs or one and done situations. They haven't been into the AFC Championship since 2017. But I got the next move for Tomlin. Come to the Giants. Treat Jackson Dart like the best quarterback you developed since Ben Roethlisberger. It is destiny.
For the AFC North, really, to me, I feel like the coach from the losing team should get the boot, because you got Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh started a year apart from each other, won a Super Bowl with their team in the earlier stages. But since then, what have they done in recent years? Gotten to the playoffs, but haven't amounted to much success come playoff time. So I feel like Steelers and Ravens are at that identical point where they've gotten complacent with their head coach and they need a fresh start. It might be a blessing in disguise for either Harbaugh or Tomlin to get the boot, because it would eventually give them a fresh start in the long term. Look how that worked with Andy Reid.
Yep. And speaking of that, the next coach that got terminated is either Reed or Harbaugh. Let's start with Andy Reid first. If they pulled the trigger and decided to make Andy Reid a most fraudulent coach, WTF? Why would they fire Andy Reid? He was doing a good job in terms of the Chiefs dynasty. The Chiefs were on the right track, but when the injuries hit with Mahomes and the other teams, they decided to cast him off in the wind due to a power struggle. Was it really his fault? No. Was it really his questionable decisions? Yes. But ultimately, I see Andy Reid staying long term. When Patrick Mahomes comes back healthy, I think he could have another shot of winning the AFC West. But wait a minute. If he tore his ACL in week 15 or week 14, I don't know. Considering how the first 10 weeks would happen would be the similar situation as the Indiana Pacers. I don't see that happening anytime soon. If they do fire Andy Reid, they will regret this day. And that day will come in sooner than later. Now for John Harbaugh, they will say that, okay, even if you did wasted Lamar Jackson's career, but why would you fire him if he made Ray Lewis retire? He went out as a champion, and since then they have not made it to the Super Bowl since. They only had They only have one AFC championship in 2023 when the Lions was on the resurgence. But John Harbaugh deserves better. In terms of the questionable play calls he did this whole season was very, very concerning. And the hot seat at that point might go up if he continues to do inconsistent. But enough of this. All those talks that they had for the Ravens becoming the best team in the North is now officially going to the hands of either Pittsburgh or yourself if you continue to play inconsistent.
Well, I mean, at this point, realistically, there's a certain handful of coaches you could see getting fired, either because they overstayed their welcome or because nothing clicked. It only got progressively worse as the season went along, or they lost the locker room. For other guys, first year guys, like, say, with Kellen Moore, they're starting to show something later in the season. He'll at least get a second year and an opportunity next year.
I would be surprised if they fire him. If they fire, here's the honorable mention coach I want to mention, Kellen Moore. If the Saints pull the trigger and say they cast him off to the wind, I think I see Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator at best. Now, as for the coaches and GMs, we knew what's going to happen then. If the draft doesn't hit or miss, or the long term, you mentioned this, but there's one thing that you did not mention, Nikki: a power struggle. Even if the locker room can be lost at times, but in a power struggle like these can be very hard to come over.
Yep, and when you get in that situation, if you're on the see what happened with John Gruden the first time with Al Davis, Raiders ultimately casted him off because the owner had the higher power.
Exactly. And not only that, but that's the same mistake they did with the Titans back in 2023 on Black Monday. After Ran Carthon fired him because of a power struggle problem. Don't get me wrong, this was, in my opinion, the most unexpected thing. But firing Pete Carroll from the Seahawks, was absolutely shocking. Speaking of Pete Carroll, he's the next coach to be on the list for Black Monday. What an awful hire. At this point, whatever you think of Pete Carroll, right? You think of him as the best QB guru head coach when it comes to Russell Wilson, right? Or the Legion of Boom. Or you could say anything good about Pete Carroll being part of the Seahawks team. But him as a Raiders coach to replace Antonio Pierce? I don't know. Pete Carroll is nothing more than the former Browns head coach Pat Shurmur with vibes. Pete Carroll is nothing more than Pat Shurmur with vibes. But when you decided to go with the offenses, Luke Getsy and the other coordinators, especially Greg Olson, you more than likely lost the plot. This team went from having AFC West aspirations to being smoked by real teams regardless, including the Giants.
I feel like now Pete Carroll's at the point where he reached his expiration date as a coach. He had an excellent run, but it always happens. I mean, Carroll is closer to Belichick's age, and we know Belichick eventually got to the point where it just ran its course with him as a head coach, and ultimately the Patriots had to move on. I feel like the Raiders failed to see the signs that Pete Carroll was declining in Seattle because there was a more talented roster there that at least kept the team somewhat stable. You see with a new fresh face at coach, the Seahawks are doing better, but the Raiders trying to bring in Pete Carroll, that really exposed where he's at currently as a head coach, and I think he's past his expiration date. He had a nice run, got the Seahawks 2 Super Bowl appearances and a Super Bowl win. He was excellent at USC, but now I feel like it just ran its course, and it's time for Pete Carroll to move along.
And that will be the end of Black Monday. Happy New Year's, everyone, and the football gods will show no mercy come Black Monday. Amen. Until next time, goodbye, my friends. Happy New Year, and good night, everyone.
Happy New Year for Nikki Stees, Agent Warrior X. Have a great night. If you're going to go out tomorrow on New Year's Eve, do so responsibly. If you're going to drink, at least have a designated sober driver, a taxi, Uber, or Lyft, and stay safe.
Be careful.
Catch you next time.